The man had built his life on order. Every morning he woke at the same hour. He folded his bed sheets tight, lined his shoes in perfect rows, and drank his coffee without sugar just the way he liked it. His house was quiet, clean, and empty. No pictures on the walls. No signs of warmth. Just space, controlled and untouched. To the outside world he seemed strong, reliable, a man who had everything together. But inside him lived a silence that was heavy, the kind that pressed on the chest late at night. A silence shaped by a single name he refused to speak. His younger brother. Years had passed, yet the wound had never closed. The betrayal had shattered more than trust. It had torn their family apart. What once was laughter around the table became empty chairs and lowered voices. What once was brotherhood became distance so wide it felt permanent. The man told himself he was not angry anymore. Anger burned out quickly. What remained was colder. He called it control. He called it strength. In truth, it was fear. Forgiveness felt dangerous. Forgiveness meant opening a door he had sealed for survival. If he forgave, the pain might rush back in. The grief, the guilt, the questions he never answered. So he chose silence instead. Silence was safer. Silence did not demand tears or weakness. At night, when the lights were off and the house grew still, memories tried to rise. He pushed them down. He reminded himself why forgiveness was impossible. Some mistakes could not be undone. Some losses could not be healed. He believed that holding on to the hurt honored what had been destroyed. But his body told a different story. Sleep no longer came easily. When it did, it was light and restless. He would wake before dawn with his heart racing, his sheets damp with sweat. Sometimes he felt watched, though the room was empty. Other times, a deep sadness pressed against him for no clear reason. That night was worse. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking clock on the wall. Each second felt louder than the last. When sleep finally pulled him under, it was not gentle. He dreamed of a hallway he had not walked through in years. The walls were familiar, yet darker than he remembered. At the end of the hall stood a door he had locked long ago. He tried to turn away, but his feet moved on their own. Just before he reached the door, he woke with a sharp breath. His chest hurt. His hands were trembling. He sat up in bed, confused and unsettled. It was only a dream, he told himself. Stress, guilt, nothing more. Yet the feeling did not fade. It lingered, heavy and warning. For the first time in years, the past had knocked. And this time it did not sound like it was going to leave. Before the silence, before the distance, there had been laughter. The brothers grew up in the same small house, sharing a narrow room with two beds pushed against opposite walls. The older brother learned early how to be careful. He watched his steps. He followed rules. He carried responsibility like a second skin. Even as a boy, he felt the weight of keeping things together, protecting their mother, helping their father, making sure nothing went wrong. His younger brother was different. He was full of motion and noise. He laughed too loudly, spoke too quickly, and felt everything deeply. Where the older brother planned, the younger one leapt. Where one held back, the other reached out. He was the kind of person who believed things would work out simply because he hoped they would. As children, they balanced each other. The older brother made sure homework was done, doors were locked, and promises were kept. The younger brother brought light into the house. Music, jokes, warmth. When life felt heavy, he found ways to make it softer. When things felt broken, he believed they could be fixed. They trusted each other without question. In their early years, the older brother often stepped in to clean up small messes caused by the younger one's carelessness. Missed deadlines. Bad choices. Half-thought plans. He told himself it was his duty. That this was what older brothers did. He believed control was love. As they grew older, that belief hardened. Adulthood came with pressure. Money was tight. Expectations grew heavier. The older brother worked longer hours, carrying the family's hopes on his back. He became known as dependable, serious, unshakable. People leaned on him and he let them. The younger brother struggled under that same weight. He wanted to help, to prove himself, but his choices were rushed and emotional. He chased opportunities that looked bright but were unstable. He trusted people too easily. He believed kindness would protect him. Then came the mistake. It happened during a time when everything already felt fragile. One decision, made quickly without thought of the cost, set off a chain that could not be stopped. The younger brother tried to fix a problem quietly, hoping no one would get hurt. Instead, everything collapsed. A loved one was lost. The house that once felt warm filled with grief so deep it stole the air from every room. The family's name, once respected, became something whispered. Doors closed. Friends pulled away. The future they had imagined shattered in a single season. The older brother stood in the ruins, stunned. He did not scream. He did not cry in front of anyone. He absorbed the pain and turned it inward. Someone had to stay strong. Someone had to carry what was left. He told himself that falling apart was not an option. The younger brother tried to explain, tried to make sense of what he himself did not fully understand. His voice shook with regret. His eyes were filled with shame. But the older brother could not hear him. All he saw was loss. All he felt was betrayal. Not just of trust, but of the future they had built together. In his mind, the mistake became a line that could never be crossed back over. The younger brother began to fade from the house. First emotionally, then physically. He spoke less. He stayed out longer. Eventually he left altogether. Some said it was guilt. Others said it was shame. To the older brother, it felt like abandonment layered on top of betrayal. He stepped fully into the role of protector, provider, and silent mourner. He took responsibility for everyone's pain, even when no one asked him to. And somewhere along the way he made a decision he never spoke out loud. Forgiveness would never be given. Not because he hated his brother, but because forgiving felt like erasing the damage. Like saying the loss was acceptable. Like admitting that the pain could be softened. He believed holding on to the hurt was the only way to honor what had been destroyed. So he sealed his heart. Years passed, but the vow remained. Quiet. Unspoken. Absolute. And though the world kept moving forward, a part of him stayed trapped in that moment. Standing in the wreckage, staring at the space where his brother used to be, promising himself that some wounds were meant to stay open forever. Time moved on, but the man stayed still. From the outside his life looked solid. He had a steady job, paid his bills on time, and kept his world neat and predictable. People respected him. Some even admired him. They called him dependable, calm, strong. He never argued. He never complained. He handled problems without emotion. What they did not see was how narrow his life had become. He kept people at a distance, even those who tried to get close. Conversations stayed polite and shallow. When others spoke about love, family, or dreams, he listened without truly hearing. He nodded when expected, smiled when required, but his heart remained guarded. Relationships never lasted. Anyone who got too close eventually felt the wall around him. He did not share his fears. He did not talk about the past. He avoided questions that required honesty. Over time, people stopped asking. Some drifted away quietly. Others left with frustration they could not explain. He told himself he preferred it this way. Love, he believed, was risky. It created weakness. It opened doors for loss. He had already paid that price once. He would not pay it again. So he chose control over connection. Routine over warmth. Silence over truth. At work, he pushed himself harder than necessary. Long hours gave him an excuse not to go home early. Responsibility kept his mind busy. If he stayed useful, he did not have to feel. If he stayed needed, he did not have to remember. But the bitterness shaped him in ways he refused to admit. He judged people quickly. Mistakes irritated him more than they should have. When someone failed, he saw carelessness instead of struggle. When someone asked for forgiveness, he saw weakness instead of courage. His world became sharp-edged, black and white. Inside, there was a constant tightness in his chest. Some nights, he sat alone in his quiet house and felt a strange emptiness he could not name. He would walk from room to room, turning on lights that revealed nothing new. He owned things, but nothing held meaning. He had stability, but no peace. Photographs were avoided. Old music was skipped. Family gatherings were rare, and when they happened, he stayed only as long as necessary. There were certain names no one mentioned. Certain memories everyone stepped around. He told himself he was fine. But his body disagreed. His shoulders stayed tense even at rest. His jaw tightened without reason. Sleep came late and left early. He woke up tired no matter how many hours he spent in bed. Sometimes, while staring at his reflection in the mirror, he barely recognized the man looking back. He looked older than his years. There were moments, small, quiet ones, when cracks appeared. A laugh from a stranger that sounded familiar. A song playing in a store that reminded him of another time. The sight of two brothers talking easily on a sidewalk. Each moment landed like a dull ache, quickly buried but never gone. He never asked himself what life might have been like if he had chosen forgiveness. That question felt dangerous. Questions led to answers. Answers led to pain. And pain was something he believed he had already endured enough of. Yet the cost of holding on was adding up. His world had become safe, but small. Protected, but lonely. He had built a life that could not hurt him, but it also could not heal him. Still he clung to it. Letting go felt like stepping into darkness without knowing if there was ground beneath his feet. Deep down, a part of him knew this way of living could not last forever. Resentment does not stay quiet forever. It settles into the bones. It leaks into thoughts, into choices, into sleep. It demands payment, one slow day at a time. He ignored the warning signs. He always had. But somewhere beneath the routine and the silence, something restless was stirring. Something tired of being locked away. Something that wanted to be seen even if it hurt. And soon it would find a way to speak, whether he was ready to listen or not. The first dream came without warning. It pulled him under like deep water, sudden and cold. One moment he was lying in bed, staring into the dark. The next he was standing somewhere he knew too well. The house. Not the one he lived in now, but the one from before. The old family home stood in front of him, exactly as it had been years ago. The paint on the walls was the same faded color. The front door still creaked when it opened. Even the air felt familiar, heavy with dust, warmth, and memory. His chest tightened. He stepped inside, though he did not remember deciding to move. The hallway stretched long and narrow, just as it always had. Light spilled in from the kitchen at the far end. He could hear voices. Soft. Urgent. His feet carried him forward. As he walked, the past unfolded around him. The furniture was in place. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Everything looked real. Too real. He could smell the food from the kitchen. He could feel the floor beneath his feet. Then he saw his brother. Younger. Nervous. Standing near the table with his hands clenched at his sides. His eyes darted toward the door as if he were afraid of being seen. Fear sat heavy on his face, mixed with something else. Determination, maybe. Or desperation. This was wrong. In his memory, his brother had been careless that day. Reckless. Smiling like nothing could go wrong. That image had stayed fixed in his mind for years. But this version was different. In the dream, his brother looked unsure. Burdened. As if the choice he was about to make weighed more than he could carry. He whispered something under his breath. Words the man could not hear, but the emotion behind them was clear. Fear. The scene shifted. Time jumped forward, fast and sharp. The mistake unfolded, the same event that had destroyed everything. The same moment the man had replayed in his mind 1,000 times. But again something was off. Details he had never noticed before stood out now. The hesitation in his brother's hands. The glance toward the door as if hoping someone would stop him. The way he flinched when things began to go wrong. This was not the face of someone acting without care. This was the face of someone trying, and failing, to do what he thought was right. The dream slowed. The man wanted to shout. To step in. To change the outcome. But his body would not move. He was trapped as a witness, forced to watch the moment unfold again, altered just enough to hurt in a new way. Then came the loss. The same pain. The same shock. The same crushing silence that followed. His brother fell to his knees in the dream, shaking. His shoulders collapsed inward, as if the weight of what he had done was breaking him from the inside. The grief on his face was raw and unbearable. The man felt something twist in his chest. Confusion. Anger. Doubt. This was not how he remembered it. The scene faded suddenly like a light being switched off. Darkness rushed in. He felt himself falling, his heart pounding hard against his ribs. He woke with a sharp gasp. His room was dark and silent. The clock on his bedside table glowed faintly. His heart raced. His hands were clenched into fists. Sweat soaked his shirt, though the air was cool. He sat up slowly, trying to steady his breathing. It was just a dream, he muttered to himself, though his voice sounded weak in the empty room. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and pressed his feet into the floor, grounding himself. He rubbed his face, dragging his hands down hard as if he could wipe the images away. Stress, he decided. That was all. The mind did strange things under pressure. Guilt had a way of twisting memories. He had known that for years. He stood and walked to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water and drank it too fast. The coolness did little to calm him. His reflection in the window looked pale, unsettled. He refused to think about what the dream might mean. Analyzing it would only open doors he had kept shut on purpose. He had survived by not questioning the past. He would not start now. Still, as he returned to bed, the feeling lingered. The dream had not felt random. It had felt deliberate. As he lay back down, sleep stayed far away. His mind replayed fragments he tried to push aside. The fear in his brother's eyes, the hesitation, the doubt. Images that did not fit the story he had told himself for years. Outside, the night remained quiet. Inside, something had shifted. The past, once silent, had begun to speak. After that night, Sleep was no longer a place of rest. The dreams returned the next evening and the one after that. Each time they came faster, pulling him down before he could fight them. They did not fade when he woke. They followed him into the day, clinging to his thoughts like shadows that refused to lift. Each dream was different, yet all of them circled the same wound. In one he stood in his brother's place. He looked down and saw unfamiliar hands shaking in front of him, hands that were younger, softer. He felt fear rush through him, sharp and overwhelming. The weight of a decision pressed hard on his chest. Every option felt wrong. Every path ended in loss. For the first time he felt what his brother must have felt that day. Panic, pressure, the desperate need to fix something before it broke completely. He woke from that dream gasping, his heart racing as if he had been running. The fear stayed with him long after his eyes opened. He sat on the edge of the bed, confused and shaken, trying to understand why the dream had felt so real. Another night, the dream showed a future. He was older. The house was larger but colder. His hair was gray, his movements slow. He moved through empty rooms, calling out, but no one answered. Days passed without voices, without warmth. Birthdays went unnoticed. Illness came with no one to sit by his side. Loneliness filled every corner. In the dream, he sat alone at a table meant for many, staring at an empty chair across from him. The weight of regret pressed down so hard it hurt to breathe. He tried to stand, to leave, but his legs would not move. When he woke, tears ran down his face before he realized he was crying. He wiped them away quickly, angry with himself. Dreams were tricks, nothing more. They had no power unless he gave it to them. But the dreams did not stop. Some nights, he relived the past again and again, each time with new details that unsettled him. The tone of a voice. The look in his brother's eyes. Moments he had ignored or misread. Other nights, the dreams were symbolic, long roads with no end, doors that would not open, mirrors that showed him alone. The line between sleep and waking began to blur. During the day he caught himself drifting. Sounds faded. Faces passed without recognition. He would pause in the middle of a task, heart pounding, as if he had just woken from another dream. His patience grew thin. His temper flared without warning. He became defensive. When someone at work made a mistake, he reacted harshly. When a friend asked if something was wrong, he brushed it off sharply. He felt exposed, as if the dreams were peeling back layers he had spent years building. At night, he tried to stay awake. He left the lights on. He watched television until his eyes burned. He told himself that if he did not sleep, he could not dream. But exhaustion always won. And when it did, the dreams were waiting. They demanded his attention. Each one pushed him closer to a truth he did not want to face. They forced him to feel what he had buried: fear, sorrow, compassion. They asked questions he had avoided for years. Was the story he told himself complete? Was the blame as simple as he believed? He hated the doubt more than the dreams themselves. His body began to show the strain. Dark circles settled under his eyes. His hands trembled when he tried to relax. His chest felt tight, as if something inside was struggling to break free. The dreams were no longer just memories or images. They were confrontations. And no matter how hard he resisted, they followed him, night after night, refusing to let him return to the comfort of his silence. He tried to fight them. He told himself again and again that the dreams were nothing more than tricks of a tired mind. Stress, exhaustion, guilt, perhaps even misplaced guilt. They were illusions, and illusions could be ignored. He clung to that thought like a lifeline, believing that if he could control his waking hours, the dreams would eventually fade. He doubled down on control. Work consumed him. He filled every hour with tasks, meetings, and responsibilities, leaving no time to think. His house remained meticulously ordered, his routines rigid. Even small comforts, books, music, or old photographs, were set aside, for they might invite memories that could feed the dreams. Discipline was his armor, and he wielded it with precision. Yet the more he tried to resist, the stronger the dreams became. They no longer came only at night. Snatches of them slipped into his waking life. A sudden image, a faint echo of laughter, a word that wasn't spoken aloud. Sometimes he would freeze mid-step, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of a past moment pressing down on him as if he had stepped back into it. His thoughts, once sharp and controlled, became jagged and restless. Rationalization became his refuge. He told himself the dreams were unfair. They were exaggerations. The past had already been dealt with. Nothing could be changed and nothing needed fixing. He repeated it silently, firmly, hoping the repetition would convince him, hoping the armor would hold. But even rationalization had cracks. Sometimes he would catch himself hesitating, his mind lingering on details he could not explain. His brother's expression, the choices he had made, the what-ifs he never allowed himself to voice. Anger, pride, and sorrow collided inside him, forming a tight knot that would not loosen. His chest ached, and his sleep became shallower, filled with flickers of the same hallways, the same rooms, the same heavy moments he thought he had buried. Fatigue began to wear him down. He moved through his days mechanically, drinking coffee without taste, answering questions without listening, nodding to people he barely saw. His body carried tension everywhere, in his shoulders, his hands, his jaw. He started to dread nighttime, knowing that sleep would come whether he wanted it or not, dragging him back into the relentless cycle. For the first time he faced a terrifying truth. Avoidance was no longer possible. The armor he had built, the routines he had perfected, the walls he had raised, they could not keep the past at bay anymore. The dreams were not random, they were a force pulling him toward something he had refused to see for years. Resistance had only strengthened their grip. In the quiet of his dimly lit room, he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, heart pounding. He had fought for control his whole life. He had convinced himself that strength meant refusing to forgive, refusing to feel. But the dreams were teaching him in the harshest way that strength without healing was not strength at all. It was a cage. And the cage was closing in. No longer could he turn away. No longer could he pretend that the past was a locked door. It had begun knocking, and it would not stop until he answered. The next dream did not sneak up on him. It was deliberate, unrelenting, as though it had been waiting for the moment he could no longer avoid it. He found himself back in the house of his youth. The walls seemed taller, the shadows deeper. Everything smelled of dust and old wood. He could hear the faint ticking of the old clock, each second echoing like a drumbeat in his chest. He was alone at first, but he knew instinctively that he was not. Then he saw him, his brother. But this time the brother was different. Not the reckless, careless boy he had condemned for years. He was hesitant, trembling, burdened by a weight the older brother had never allowed himself to notice. The small details jumped out, the way his shoulders slumped, the way his hands shook, the way his eyes darted nervously toward the door, as if seeking permission to run or an unseen warning. The older brother felt a strange pang in his chest. Something he had buried for decades stirred. In the dream he saw the choices that had led to that fateful day. He saw the moments he had ignored, the warnings he had missed. His brother had acted recklessly, yes, but not out of malice. Not out of disregard. He had been trying to protect, to save, to make something right in a world that offered no easy choices. Every decision carried risk, and every risk had a cost. And then he saw himself. He saw the countless moments he had failed to act, the times he could have stepped in and changed the course of events but chose control over intervention. He realized with a shocking clarity that his judgment had been incomplete. He had blamed his brother entirely when in truth, both of them had been caught in the same storm. One acted, one hesitated, but the outcome was a combination of both. The older brother's chest tightened and a lump rose in his throat. The bitterness he had clung to for years began to feel heavy, unwieldy, wrong. The anger that had hardened him, that had shaped his life, began to shift into something else: pain, sorrow, and a strange, unfamiliar understanding. He remembered the night after the disaster, the silence at the dinner table, the hollow eyes of his mother, the quiet collapse of his father's shoulders. He had focused so much on the betrayal, on the reckless choice, that he had never seen the fear, the regret, or the humanity behind it. The dream revealed it all. His brother had been trapped too, fighting unseen battles, carrying guilt that mirrored his own. The mistakes had been human, tragic, and irreversible, not monstrous, not unforgivable. And suddenly the older brother felt the enormity of the years spent holding on to anger, the years spent building walls that kept out not only his brother but the possibility of healing, of love, of relief. He could not breathe. He wanted to turn away, to reject this truth, to cling to the certainty that had protected him. But he could not. Every instinct, every memory, every suppressed emotion pointed him here, to the full, painful reality of what had happened. And in that moment, guilt replaced certainty. Not only for the past but for all the time lost since. The older brother sank to the floor of the dream, head in hands, trembling. He had spent decades believing he had been wronged beyond repair. He had painted the story in black and white, never imagining the gray in between. He had punished his brother in silence, punished himself with loneliness, punished his own heart by refusing to see the truth. The dream faded slowly, leaving him in darkness. He awoke with tears on his cheeks, chest aching, body trembling. For the first time he understood something terrifying and freeing all at once. Forgiveness was not just about his brother. It was about himself. And he realized in that quiet, trembling moment that the story he had told himself for years, the story of betrayal, blame, and resentment, was incomplete. He had carried the weight of half-truths, and that weight had almost broken him. Now he could feel the first cracks in the walls he had built around his heart. The truth was heavy, but it was real. And reality, as painful as it was, offered something he had long denied himself: a path forward, a path toward understanding, a path toward the impossible, terrifying, and necessary choice of forgiveness. The days after the revelation were not easy. He moved through life as though in a fog, the truth from the dream pressing against him like a storm he could not outrun. Simple tasks felt heavier. Meals tasted bland. Conversations seemed distant even when people stood right in front of him. The memory of what he had held on to, the bitterness, the judgment, the resentment, was sharp and undeniable. At night, sleep returned, but it was different now. The dreams had changed. They no longer just replayed the past, they projected what might have been. In one dream he saw himself decades older, a man who had lived a long life but with a heart still clenched. He moved through an empty house, calling out, searching for his brother, for family, for connection, but finding nothing. Each room was cold. Each chair remained unoccupied. He aged alone, carrying grief he had never released, haunted by the weight of what might have been if forgiveness had been offered. The pain of the imagined future clawed at him. He saw missed weddings, birthdays, milestones, quiet nights spent alone with regret. Faces he might have known well instead were strangers. Voices that should have been familiar were silent. And in the middle of it all he saw the brother he had condemned for years, his presence absent, gone not just physically but emotionally, lost because the older brother had refused to open the door. The crushing realization hit him like cold water. Unforgiveness had a cost. Not just for his brother. Not just for himself. But for the life they could have shared, for the love, the laughter, and the simple moments that he had barred from ever happening. He had built walls to protect his heart, but those walls had become a prison. And inside that prison he was alone. He remembered all the years he had spent avoiding contact, avoiding emotions, avoiding truth. Each day he had told himself he was protecting himself, that he was strong, that he was safe. And each day he had quietly lost a piece of himself, leaving behind a hollow version of the man he could have been. He felt grief in ways he had never allowed before. Grief not only for what had been lost in the past but for what had never existed. The smiles, the reconciliation, the bond he and his brother might have repaired. He wept quietly in his home, tears streaking down a face long accustomed to stoicism. The walls that had kept him safe were cracking, and the fear of what lay beyond them was both terrifying and necessary. The dreams now seemed to encourage him rather than punish. They were no longer shadows pressing him down but mirrors showing what he had denied himself, the cost of a heart unwilling to forgive. Each vision whispered a silent truth: forgiveness was not weakness. It was not erasing pain. It was the only way to free himself from a life of isolation and grief. Slowly, reluctantly, he began to sense a possibility. A small, tentative thought: perhaps it was not too late. Perhaps the life he had imagined, empty and lonely, could be altered. Perhaps he could reach beyond the walls he had built, reach toward the brother he had condemned, and find some measure of healing. But even this thought brought fear. To forgive meant vulnerability. To forgive meant facing pain he had protected himself from for decades. To forgive meant admitting that he had been wrong, not just about his brother but about himself. And yet, beneath the fear, a fragile spark of hope flickered. The man lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling, listening to his own uneven breathing. The room was quiet, but inside him, the truth echoed loudly. The life he had chosen in the name of strength had exacted a price, and it was time to pay it, not with punishment but with courage. For the first time in years he wondered, could forgiveness really set him free? And somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that it could. The night came, heavier than the others, carrying with it a dream that felt different, closer, sharper, impossible to ignore. He found himself standing at the edge of a vast, empty field. The wind swept across it, cold and biting, and the sky above was dark, filled with clouds that churned like restless thoughts. At the far end of the field, his brother stood, small and distant, waiting silently. His posture was cautious, hesitant, and yet there was hope in the way he held himself, a flicker of faith in a world that had been cruel to both of them. The older brother's chest tightened. Every instinct told him to turn away, to retreat into the walls he had built over decades. The familiar armor of pride, anger, and resentment urged him to stay safe, to preserve control. But something deeper, something urgent and undeniable, pulled him forward. Step by step he moved across the field. Each footfall felt heavier than the last, as though the weight of years of bitterness and blame pressed down on him. Images from the past flashed in his mind, the laughter of childhood, the moments of closeness, the mistakes, the silence, the grief. Every memory he had buried demanded acknowledgement. Every wound he had refused to touch throbbed like a drumbeat beneath his ribs. When he reached his brother, the wind shifted. It no longer pushed against him, it held him steady. He looked into his brother's eyes, and for the first time he saw the human truth he had long avoided: vulnerability, fear, and sorrow. He saw someone who had erred but had suffered as much as he had. Someone who had carried guilt quietly, painfully for a lifetime. He felt tears sting his eyes. The tightness in his chest eased, just slightly, as if the first cracks in his armor had opened. He realized that forgiveness was not about excusing the past. It was not about forgetting or pretending the pain never existed. It was about letting go of the hold that pain had over him, freeing himself from the cage of resentment he had built. A voice inside him whispered, barely audible, "Let it go. Choose release." It was terrifying. To forgive meant to open himself fully, to risk more pain, to confront all the emotions he had kept hidden for decades. But it also promised relief, a chance at life beyond anger, a path toward healing he had never allowed himself to imagine. He took a deep breath and spoke the words that had been locked in his chest for years, first to himself, then to the figure before him. "I forgive you." The air around him seemed to shift. The field brightened slightly, the clouds parting as if in quiet acknowledgement. His brother's shoulders relaxed, and for the first time in years, a shared understanding passed between them. No words were needed beyond the act itself. Forgiveness had been offered, not as a demand, not as a declaration, but as an honest, raw, and necessary truth. The older brother woke with a start. Sunlight had begun to spill into the room, warm and gentle, but his heart felt lighter, unburdened in a way it had never been. The tension in his body eased. His breathing was steady, not frantic. For the first time in decades he felt clarity, not confusion, hope, not despair. He knew the work was not finished. Life would not magically repair itself. Rebuilding trust, reconnecting with his brother, facing the consequences of years of silence, all of that would require courage. But for the first time he understood something he had long avoided. Forgiveness was not a gift for his brother alone. It was a gift for himself, a key to unlocking the life he had denied for too long. And for the first time in years he believed it was possible to move forward. The decision had been made. Forgiveness was no longer a thought confined to dreams, it had become a necessity he could no longer ignore. He drove with a quiet determination, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. Each mile brought a mixture of fear, anticipation, and a strange, fragile hope. What would his brother say? Would he accept it, or had too many years of silence made reconciliation impossible? The questions circled endlessly in his mind, but he pressed on. When he arrived, the house was smaller than he remembered, cozy but lived in. His brother was there, as though waiting for this very moment, standing near the door with an expression that mirrored his own, cautious, uncertain, yet hopeful. Neither man spoke at first. They simply looked at each other, decades of distance stretching between them like a chasm. The older brother swallowed hard. Memories flooded in, every laugh, every fight, every moment lost to silence. He saw the boy his brother had once been, the man he had grown into, and the shared history that could not be erased no matter the mistakes. Finally he spoke, his voice low but steady. I've carried this for too long. I've held on to anger, onto blame, and it's poisoned me. I was wrong to let it define us. I forgive you. For a moment time seemed to stand still. The wind through the trees, the faint hum of distant traffic, even the creak of the front porch, everything faded into silence. His brother's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and he took a hesitant step forward. I never stopped regretting, his brother admitted, voice cracking. Every day I thought about what I did, and what I cost us. I just didn't know how to fix it. The older brother's chest tightened, not with anger but with relief. Forgiveness was no longer just an internal act. It was real. It was shared. They stood there for a long moment, the years of silence, the grief, and the pain pressing against them. Yet, in that shared gaze there was also understanding. The bond that had been broken had not vanished completely. It had been buried, waiting for them to dig it out. The younger brother took a step closer. Tentatively, slowly, he extended his hand, not as an apology, not as a demand, but as a bridge. The older brother met it. Their hands grasped, strong and steady, the physical connection sealing what words could not fully capture. Tears rolled down both their faces, but there was no shame in them, only the release of decades of pain, the unspoken acknowledgement of shared loss, and the fragile, precious hope of a future together. They moved inside, still cautious, still processing, but together. Words began to flow, memories revisited, laughter quietly emerging between pauses of tears. The tension, the resentment, the guilt, all of it began to loosen its grip. For the older brother, the act of forgiveness was not a single moment but the start of something ongoing. It required honesty, patience, and courage. But he no longer feared it. He had taken the first step, and it was enough to know that he could continue one day at a time. The room, once heavy with years of silence, now felt lighter. For the first time in decades, he could imagine a life where the past did not dictate every moment. And though the road ahead would not be simple, he knew they would walk it together. Brothers once divided, now facing the possibility of healing. In that quiet house, surrounded by sunlight and the gentle rhythm of ordinary life, forgiveness had finally taken root. And with it, the promise of a different future began to bloom. The days that followed were quiet, yet filled with subtle shifts. Life did not suddenly transform. There were no miracles, no sweeping declarations of happiness, but something fundamental had changed. He woke each morning with a lighter chest, the heaviness that had clung to him for decades beginning to lift. Sleep was no longer a battlefield. He moved through his home without the constant tension that had defined his days for years. Even the small moments, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft light of morning through the blinds, felt warmer, more alive. He and his brother began to rebuild their relationship slowly. At first, conversations were cautious, deliberate. They shared stories of the years lost, small regrets, and tentative joys. Laughter returned, shyly at first, then with more confidence. They talked about the past, not to dwell on it but to acknowledge it, to honor the wounds and mistakes that had shaped them. Family gatherings, once a source of anxiety, no longer felt like minefields. Though they did not erase the pain, the tension eased. Each shared smile, each easy exchange reminded him that connection could exist again. He began to allow himself small gestures of closeness, a hand on a shoulder, a brief embrace, a shared cup of coffee in the morning. Even beyond family, the change rippled outward. He found himself listening more carefully, engaging more openly with colleagues and friends, offering kindness without calculation. The bitterness that had once hardened him softened, allowing empathy and understanding to flow where only suspicion and control had lived. The dreams ceased. They no longer demanded confrontation, no longer forced him to relive the past. In their place, sleep became restorative. He woke with clarity instead of confusion, calm instead of dread. The past still existed, but it no longer ruled him. He felt lighter, not because everything was perfect, but because he was no longer imprisoned by unforgiveness. The walls that had kept him safe for so long had been replaced with openness, allowing life to reach him in ways he had long denied. And slowly, he began to imagine a future that had seemed impossible before. Days that could be shared, laughter that could be felt, relationships that could grow. He realized that forgiveness was not a single act. It was a choice, repeated daily, in how he saw himself, his brother, and the world. He still remembered the pain. He still carried scars. But they no longer dictated his every move. They had become reminders of resilience, of lessons learned, and of the possibility that even the deepest wounds could be softened by honesty, courage, and love. For the first time in decades, he could see beyond the past. And in that vision, he found hope. A quiet, steady hope that life could be lived fully, free from the chains of resentment. The future was no longer a shadow. It was a space waiting to be filled, a life waiting to be reclaimed. The dreams had stopped. The restless nights, the haunting images, the pull of the past, they were gone. But their lessons remained, etched into him in ways he could never forget. He understood now that forgiveness did not erase the pain. It did not pretend that the years lost, the mistakes made, or the grief endured had never existed. What it did was transform them. Pain became wisdom. Loss became awareness. Silence became an invitation to connection. He thought often of the field in his dream, where he had faced his brother and made the choice to forgive. That moment had not been an ending, it had been a beginning. It had shown him that life, even after betrayal and heartbreak, could offer second chances, if only one had the courage to take them. The man now lived differently. He allowed himself to feel, to reach out, to risk vulnerability. He laughed more freely, spoke more openly, and met the world with a heart slightly more tender than before. He had rebuilt walls where necessary, but they no longer imprisoned him, they protected him just enough to move safely forward. And his brother? They moved forward together. Not perfectly, not without moments of tension or old memories surfacing, but with honesty, with humility, and with a shared understanding that some wounds could only heal when both were willing to let go. The older brother often reflected on the journey, realizing that the dreams had been a gift disguised as torment. They had forced him to confront himself, to see the complexity of human error, and to recognize that anger held more cost than healing ever could. He carried the memories of what had been broken and the lessons of what had been learned, walking through life with the quiet knowledge that forgiveness was not weakness. It was liberation. And in that liberation he found something he had long thought impossible: peace. A gentle, steady peace. He had been wounded, yes, but he was no longer defined by the wounds. He had chosen release. He had chosen love over bitterness. And in that choice he had discovered what the dreams had been trying to teach him all along: that the heart, once opened, could heal, endure, and even hope again. The past would always remain a part of him, but it no longer held him captive. The man had finally stepped out of the shadow of unforgiveness, carrying with him the quiet, lasting redemption of a life reclaimed.